Mom Who Knows Nada. My name is Brianna. This is the Mama Knows Nada podcast. We're talking to Shanna today. She is a coach and as well as the founder of Maternal Grove. She's going to share her journey to coaching with us and what inspired her to become a coach and how she can help moms empower themselves in a multitude of ways. So Shanna, thank you so much for being here. I had a great discovery call with you, so I'm so excited for this podcast and all this insight that you can bring us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. It's my pleasure. I love talking to other moms. I love talking to people who have different perspectives. And I love talking about people who can make me think about things that I didn't know I needed to know. And that you were definitely one of them. I was like, shit. So I was like thinking about that square one thing for days. Anyway, we'll get to that. Let's talk about your journey to coaching. How did you find that this was your calling?
Yeah, so I always viewed my path as very linear in life. You know, I would go to college, I would start moving, I would get a career, a job, I would start moving up the corporate ladder, I would get married, I would have kids, and I did everything exactly on plan. And what I realized is that what they don't tell you, while that path can be very direct and very linear, how much harder it gets when you become a maternal figure. And, you know, we're raised in this environment where moms just got it, you know, like things just run smoothly because moms got it. And that's at least the way my household was. I know everyone is growing up in a different space, but, you know, that is definitely a societal pressure on moms that we both face every day. And when I hit the point in the pandemic, my daughter was born in April 2020. My son was 2 at the time. I was working a full-time corporate job. My husband was working a full-time corporate job. I broke because the pandemic put so much pressure on me. It started to shine a light on the fact that I felt 100% responsible for my family. And I felt that way before the pandemic, but it took a pandemic for me to actually break and not be able to do it anymore. So in those moments, I was confronted with 2 different topics that I basically was like, all right, enough is enough. I have to make a change if I'm going to live a happy life for myself. The first one was my parenting perspective. I decided that if I wanted my husband to be supportive and engaged and involved, I had to be supportive and engaged and involved with him. So if he loaded the dishwasher, not to go behind him and reload it and constantly be micromanaging all of those details that he was actually handling. Really acknowledge him for all the work he was doing around the house and stop letting it fall just on my shoulders, that responsibility. And the other side was I needed to change my career. So to answer your question, I wasn't happy with my career. I kept pivoting jobs every couple of years, really trying to tweak, okay, if I didn't love this aspect, how could I make that aspect better in a different environment, in a different space? And what I came to realize was that the space I was working wasn't the space I was meant to be in. And I found coaching through a whole bunch of spiritual awakening moments of, holy shit, I don't know what life coaching is, but why it's coming to me, I need to dig more into. And I did. And I started coaching in the middle of the pandemic. I left my corporate job. I started coaching school. I graduated and opened my own practice, all with no daycare, no family. My family's all in Maryland still. I'm in California, and I did the damn thing.
Amen. I love that. You know, like you just gotta sometimes have to say, fuck it and do what you want. And sometimes it's a slow process. And we've chatted about this before, but that's what I did. I was like, I'm good at talking to people. I want to interview people. I want to get their perspectives. I want their viewpoints. I want to create an ecosystem of knowledge and insight that people can pull from. You don't have to utilize everything or listen to every podcast, but some things that would resonate with you, like where's that hub? Where's that ecosystem? Where's that, collaborative space to share ideas? And you know what? might not be have the million followers that you want or like whatever, but step by step. So I can appreciate that on a very personal level. I'm saying, yeah, let me just do this thing.
You have to start somewhere. You gotta start somewhere. We're not going to start with a million followers. It takes time. And even with a small community, I find, there's so much more impact that can happen in that sort of safe space where you can really allow your audience to feel heard, right? You can communicate with them. You can really find out what do they need and serve them the best way possible. So I love the fact that I do not have a million people, because that is way more DMs than I have time to respond to.
I am a one-woman show, okay?
Exactly.
Back off. And I have so much time to get this production in order.
Exactly.
How has your role as a mom shaped your career as a coach?
So as I mentioned in my story, I suffered a lot in my maternal journey, especially in the beginning. Again, I believed that the success of my family fell on my shoulders, that it was my responsibility and mine alone. So being a mom has really given me perspective on what others are experiencing, right? My story is relatable.
Right.
I can be empathetic to these other moms that are in, a same position that I was in. And I understand the struggles, but I also know how much room there is for transformation. Because at the end of the day, I made that shift. I could have continued in that path where I was unhappy and not serving myself and not living my life. But ultimately, that's not for me. It's never been that way for me my entire life, and it's not going to be that way now, whether I'm a mom or not. So I understand the space that you have available to make change. So it's just brought a passion to light for me that I never knew before. I always had that in conversations. You talk to those moms and you commiserate. I've never been that kind of mom. I don't like to sit there and say, oh, your kid's throwing food on the floor too. Like, I get it. It's just, I don't want to wallow. I want to make things better. I'm a very optimistic person. I like change. I like progress. Which doesn't make vacations always very relaxing either, because I want things to be happening. So I know that we have the power to rewrite our roles. So that is definitely a huge way that my mom space has impacted my career and my business.
So when you became a mom, what choices did you make to honor this shift? Because if you're already in a corporate environment and you're trying to move up the ladder, you said you had to kind of identify where the gaps were, et cetera. But, how did you choose to honor yourself in both parameters? Because that's a really hard, I think, a delicate thing to balance. And I think a lot of women struggle with that. They think that it's going to be all sunshine and rainbows, or, that's the story we're sold. But it's not that way at all, and we all know that. So how did you choose to honor yourself and actually make the space so that you could honor yourself?
So at first, I did not do a good job of this, because it did take me a long time to even realize the pressures. I was so believing this story of what my role was supposed to be that I didn't allow myself the opportunity to look at that invisible workload and make it easier or better for myself. I just didn't even know that was a thing. So from that perspective, that took a long time to get to that point. A lot of learning and a lot of trial and error. And like I said, with the pandemic, that was really the point in which I was acknowledging the problem so I could make the change. I will say, though, the part where I did shift significantly was when you become a parent, when you get a new job, when something changes in your life, we do come back to square one. So, to the point of which you were so excited to talk about, square one, when people say like, oh, back to square one, that's a real thing. That's a real phrase for a reason. When you're, I've had, before I became a mom, I think I was 30. So I had 29 years of being an independent person, right? 28 when you factor in, being pregnant on top of everything else. I had a lot of years and a lot of practice of being an independent human. When you become a mom, you lose that independence, right? You can still keep it in some ways. I'm not saying that, it's just point blank, it's gone. You can have moments of it and you can carve out that space for your personal identity, but you are changed. And
Absolutely.
what I did to help me get through that time was feel the feels. Because the only thing that happens in square one is you completely fall apart. You completely dissolve. You don't know what the hell is going on. And that's okay, right? Like, this is a new space. I think we enter this space of motherhood like, I'm supposed to know everything. My maternal instincts are just going to kick on. And all of a sudden, I'm going to be this, genius and just totally know what I'm doing. No. I remember leaving the hospital was the scariest day of my entire life. It's scary. And I do not say that for a fact either. Like, it was the scariest day of my life because there's no handbook. There's no right or wrong. It is simply what you want to do is the way it's going to be.
Absolutely.
And that was terrifying for me because I like to have, in my very type A world, I'd like to have a plan. So yeah, the way I honored my shift to motherhood was just really letting myself take my time and give myself grace to learn how to be a mom, because it's not something that happens overnight. It's not something you learn how to do overnight. The baby may come overnight, but it's not, you're not going to learn everything you need. And all of those stages, oh my God, we still hit new stages all the time. It's just, it's always evolving. Your kid could be 30 and you're going to hit new stages. It's just the way it works. So really allowing myself to be in that square one space of just not knowing what's going on and just figuring it out.
I think that's a beautiful thing because we want the answers. I think innately as a human being, we want solutions. Maybe that's a culture thing. Ambiguity doesn't really work for I'll say our Western ways, if you will. And I also think that leaning into who and what you're feeling is the best way forward. Like, I remember when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, what? And how do I do this? But there was like a shift instantaneously in my brain. And even today, my husband will like, well, how did you know to do that? Or why are you picking this now? And I'm like, it just feels like the right thing to do. Yes. And so as much as there's not a manual and as much as like you're learning on the fly, literally. And you're right. There's so many stages and phases to go through. And, like my son's 4 and he's so different from when he was 3. And then, he's 4.5, heaven forbid.
How dare you?
Oh my gosh. That was a meltdown. I'm closer to 5. I'm like, okay, kid, whatever. Anyway, different subject, different day. But like all of that makes sense that what you're saying is like you might have some instincts. You might be scared to follow them. You might be nervous to follow them. People might be telling you you're doing the wrong thing all the time, but you have to lean in and do what's right for you with all that information around you. And like, again, picking and choosing what works for you. And sometimes that's hard. It's really noisy out there.
Oh my gosh.
I like that you said that. What methods do you implement in your coaching practice to help support moms?
So I would say, and looking at this as a main framework, basically.
Fair.
I show up for my clients at the most basic level. I show up for my clients. And what that means is I am simply creating a space where my clients can talk. How often in life do we try to open up to people, especially as a mom? Do we open up to people and it's immediately met with either judgment or unwanted advice, right?
All
We're constantly getting stuff shoved at us and we're told our feelings aren't right, or we don't deserve to feel that way, or we shouldn't feel that way. And then it leads into us feeling guiltier for the way we feel. Like, no, I create a space where you can simply show up and talk. Because when we talk, it allows what's happening in our brain to come out. It makes it less scary. It makes it less loud. And you can actually hear what you're trying to say. And what I do as a coach is listen to my clients and help them figure out, what are they trying to say? What is actually the root of their problem? And then once we identify what their problem is, we can actually help them find their own personal solutions, because it is not a job of anyone else in this world to tell you what's right for you. You can go to someone and ask for advice. You know, you can get different opinions, but ultimately from all those different opinions, you still have to make a choice of what you want to follow, right? Absolutely. So instead of skipping all of that, as you called it, noise, which I totally agree with, I help these maternal figures find their innate wisdom, to look inside of themselves and figure out what's the solution that actually works best for them. And once we identify it and we start thinking like, oh, well, I couldn't do that because of this, then we work on those thoughts. You know, we really just try to take those false beliefs, to take those false narratives and question them. Questioning ourselves is so extremely powerful. So yeah, the main framework, I would say, is that space where people can just open up and talk and feel safe. And then in that space, that's when we start to identify, what square are you in? Are you in that square one phase where you simply just need to grieve, to let go of something that used to be so you can embrace a new identity? Or have you already made it through that and you're already starting to get into square two, where you can dream a little bit, where you start thinking like, well, if it's not this, what could it be? So the tools that I have are very different for each of those people. Because you could imagine, you know, a grieving identity is going to be a much different conversation than like, oh, what is possible for myself? So it's really listening and then trying to find the best tool that works in that space.
Sounds like a pretty basic and obvious thing. Just listen and evaluate. You know?
If only more of us listened in life, you know, listen to each other
and evaluate in a productive manner. Like it's, you know, it's asking the tough questions. I think, you know, that makes the difference. And some of us don't want to ask those tough questions because I think in a way we might be scared of the answer. We can dive into that more now or later, but, you know, I like what you said, like that innate, you know, power, however the phrase was that you said. And I think that's beautiful because there is so much, you know, we have these instincts. Like, why do you think we refuse to trust those instincts?
Yeah. So going back to what we were talking earlier, I think there's kind of two parts to this. The first one is that we live in a society of information overload. I mean, you can go on Pinterest and be overwhelmed in a matter of 30 seconds just because there are a gazillion different ways to do anything. There's always a new way. There's always a better way of doing something. So I think that's one part. And the other part you touched on earlier as well is that we have a real fear of being shamed as humans. You know, it is human nature to want to fit in. It's a survival instinct that we have. I mean, we're animals at the end of the day. So it is a survival instinct to keep us alive, to fit in. There's a real fear of being shamed, and we see it happen all the time. So I would say those two are part of the reasons why we really don't listen to our instincts.
I mean, the fear and the shaming, I didn't really think about that. Like, because there's definitely things I don't share with people because I know the feedback I'll get, and you're just like, oh, it's not worth it. I'm just gonna tune it out. How can we realign to better tune into that? Those innate nuances that we already have.
Yeah. So the first step really is to cut out the noise. You have to stop searching. I remember Kelly Ripa once said in her morning show, she's like, put your thumbs down. And it was about something else, but like It's so true. Like, put your phone down, put your thumbs away, like, stop searching on the internet for all of these different answers. It's so easy to, and I get that. And sometimes, you do need information, but stop seeking everyone else's information. So that's really step one. And step two is slow down. Slow down enough where you can start paying attention to yourself. You need to give yourself time to actually think about, what do you want to do? Give yourself the opportunity, the space to really find your own answers. We're so quick to just get on the internet because it's convenient. We've been conditioned to do that. And again, there's a lot of great information out there, but there's also a lot of really bad information out there. So just slowing down to really get into your own body and see what is right to me. And that's very simple. I think oftentimes some of the things I talk about with clients are so basic that they're like, how can this work? It just seems so simple. It doesn't have to be a complex process. To simply listen to yourself means you can just sit down for a minute and just ask yourself a few questions. It's not like that you have to be in this huge meditative state or to go into this whole, process. You can just sit and be quiet. You can sit and ask yourself a few questions. It doesn't have to be challenging. When we get ourselves into hot water, kind of going back to why don't we listen to our innate, nuances, that innate wisdom that we have, is because when we find that answer, like kind of what you were saying before, like sometimes we don't really want to know the answer. When we find the answer, we're so quick to start thinking, well, what if someone saw this? Like, what if someone knew that I was thinking this, or I can't do this, or I'm not supposed to do it that way. Those thoughts start to steer us away from following our innate wisdom. So again, that's a great time to question yourself, to feel like, okay, I have an answer. And then to start thinking those thoughts, noticing that those thoughts are bubbling up and start to question, where are these coming from? What am I scared of? And start to figure out, where could this be coming from? Because our brain is trying to protect us, right? It's always going to make up stories because it's trying to rationalize everything that's happening around us. Our brain wants to keep us safe. So it's naturally going to do that. It's a matter of, are you going to listen, right? Just because we think it doesn't mean that it's true. So that's, it's very easy to start listening to ourselves once you do it, but then keeping yourself on that path can be challenging.
Well, and I think there's taking it a step further. It's knowing that when you fail or you're not hitting the milestone, you want to have a milestone. Like, what's your evaluation plan? Because there's definitely days I feel like I'm failing in every capacity, like especially with like building a podcast, creating, a community, like like all the things. And there are definitely days where I'm like, why the fuck am I doing this? Like and having that like self-belief to keep persevering is another thing, because you have to maintain your messaging to yourself. You have to remain like consistent with your messaging. Like, I was talking to a therapist the other day and I was like, oh, the dog gets all the love, the dog can do no wrong. He's the goodest boy, but aren't I the bestest that I am? Like, aren't I the goodest mom that I can be? Like, I'm not going to be perfect all the time. So it's embracing that and letting that messaging be consistent and continual, even when it feels like I'm not where I want to be. Does that make sense?
100%. And what you just also described is a part of the change cycle. So
look at me.
You could be a coach.
I don't know about
Square one is when you're back to the beginning, right? You don't know what's going on. You just have to grieve. So for example, becoming a mom. You're not this independent person anymore, right? You have to let go of that to some degree in order to be able to embrace this new life. Because the worst thing we can do is cling on to something that doesn't exist anymore. That's going to cause instant suffering. So once you dissolve those beliefs and you grieve, you start getting into the phase where you can dream and you can scheme. But just because you dream something in square two doesn't mean that when you put it into reality, it's going to work as you expected. So what you just described you could have started this podcast with the goal of, well, I want 50,000 listeners and I want this and I want that.
Right.
And in our heads, it can feel totally achievable, and it can be. But if you set an expectation of, oh, in the first year, I'm going to have 50,000 listeners, that may not have been a realistic expectation from the get-go. So what you're describing is actually square three, which is the hardest square to be in, because you get to the point where you're like, all right, I've dreamed up what I'm going to do, and now I'm going to do it. The only thing you can expect in square three is for things to not go as planned. Because whatever you dream, when you put those rubbers to the road, it's going to be different. You know, the tires are going to hit a different way, and they may want to change lanes, and, you know, messages may not resonate the way you thought they would be. It's a learning experience. So this is the hardest square really to be in and to navigate, and know that you're going to get bumped back to square one every once in a while. But your process is going to be quicker to get back through those squares because you've already done the hard work. Now you're just like, how do I tweak this? How do I make this a little better for myself? And no, failure is going to happen. So it's how quickly can you bounce back from that failure to readjust? I think failure is so beneficial because if you don't fail, how are you ever supposed to learn a better way of doing things, right?
Right. Well, and the other thing that I always come back to is my kid, you know, my child. I tell him all the time, you know, he wants to learn how to play tennis. He wants to play soccer. He wants to dance. He wants to swim. And he said, Mommy, I can't do it. And I'm like, it's okay to try and be bad. I was like, do you really like it? Do you want to get better? Okay, then you have to keep practicing. So if we're in that role model, leading by example world, well, what am I supposed to do? Just give up when I'm telling him to do the opposite? That's kind of, counterproductive, counterintuitive, and like I'm a hypocrite.
Oh yeah.
So if I want him to behave in a certain way, do I need to model that behavior?
Yes.
So that's a struggle.
That's one of my favorite questions to ask a client, because so often, especially again, just using that maternal figure as an example, we're so critical on ourselves. We live up to this ideal of trying to be this perfect parent that doesn't exist. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. So we become so critical on ourselves. So one of the questions I'd like to ask is, what advice would you give a friend right now?
Ooh,
because
that's a good one.
It's so much easier to see from my perspective, running a podcast is not easy. Being a mother is not easy, right? Like you can give someone else a lot more grace, a lot more easily because it's outside of you. When it gets in our head, it just, again, it's an echo chamber in there. It gets a lot louder and it gets a lot scarier. So just being kind and gracious with ourselves will go a long way.
It's funny that you said that. I do have a friend who has the solution to everybody's problems but her own. And I was just talking about this the other day, and I was like, don't you think it's ironic that, you know, she can fix all of our issues but can't fix her own? It's kind of funny. So it's just interesting. What insight or advice, direction, whatever you want to call it, what do you find yourself repeating the most to some of your clients? So like a common theme?
There's a lot of themes. Because I think so many of us really at the core of it have such similar problems. And the main problem is that we just want to be the best mom we can be, right? Like we just want to show up for ourselves. And other than questioning everything, I think questioning is key in life to finding, you know, why you feel a certain way, why you're thinking certain things, how to make it better. Yeah. The biggest aha moment came for me during a therapy session a long time ago. It was before I was even pregnant. I was telling this woman, you know, I'm trying to give 100% to my job. I'm trying to give 100% to me, to my husband, you know, to all these different areas. And she looked at me and was like, no wonder you're tired. You're trying to give, I think it was like 500% by the end of, you know, everything I was saying. She's like, you're one human. You have 100% to give. And in that moment, I was like, What? You just blew my mind, because it is so true. We're always trying to be the best at everything, to give 100% of ourselves to everything that we're doing. And I'm not saying you can't show up with your full potential, but be realistic again with your expectations. So what I love to do is I have clients divide out their day, like literally by the hour. Take 24 hours and divide it up. Where are you in those different hours? Because this was one of my biggest aha moments when I did it for myself. I realized, you know, the phrase, I don't have time for me.
Yeah.
I hate that phrase. I hate that thought, because it's not true. It's not true. You can get so tied up in the nuances of the day to day, and you could have those 20 minutes for yourself. How often do we have a block of time and we're like, well, I can't take that time for me, so I'm going to go do the dishes. That just proves that that thought wasn't true anyway, that I don't have time. You did have time. You chose not to use it for yourself. So what I like to do with those hours is really divide it up and say, I want to sleep for X amount of hours. I want to work for X amount of hours. That means I show up as a mom in these time frames.
Right.
And then that leaves me X time for myself.
Right.
Then you can stop that mental juggling. You know, so often, like, this is one of those topics, that one of the themes where people come to me and they're like, I just feel so out of balance. I feel like I'm juggling everything. I have so many balls up in the air all the time, all at the same time. When in reality, if you're at work, show up at work. If you're home, look, I'm doing this podcast with you right now. I'm not thinking about my son in school, my husband working, all the things, all the dishes in the sink. I'm not thinking about any of that stuff. I'm fully present in this conversation. And when you learn to become fully present in what you're doing, that mental juggling stops. That's when you feel in balance.
That's a good note.
So even just doing a simple breakdown of your hours can make a huge difference in understanding where you can show up throughout your day and how you want to show up throughout the day. So that's been really helpful. And then when you do start feeling out of balance, you can come back to that breakdown and reestablish. Have you been working more hours recently that's maybe cut into your personal time? Have your kids been sick at home recently and maybe that responsibility has fallen on you more, that it's cut into your work time? What is it that's feeling off balance to you? And then when you address that, you can reestablish balance.
Balance is a really hard thing. And I think balance is so, for me, it's like day to day. Like, what do I need to feel balanced? And it's funny, you know, I've tried exactly what you're saying, like compartmentalize my time. And then, like, as a writer, I'll find that I'm like going down a good rabbit hole and I don't want to stop. Or I'm on that rabbit hole and I have to go pick my kid up from school. And then I'm frustrated because now I know I'm going to lose that beautiful train of thought that I had. And it's like, for me, that is a balance and a struggle. Like every day I'm like, I wish I could compartmentalize my creative. I mean, I'm sure there's a way I can. It's probably mind over matter and discipline. There, I'm answering my own questions.
There you go. And it's so funny. It's so funny you bring up that example, because I have the same problem too. It's always like towards the tail end of my working hours, because I only work a certain amount of hours every morning, because then I pick my kids up from school and I want to be present with them in the afternoon. So I've created a schedule that gives me that balance, but I have that problem that you just described so often.
Right.
And I started to realize when I walk, that is when creativity comes to me the most. Yep. So I actually was just writing an article the other day, and for a mom organization. And I was sitting in my computer like, okay, you have an hour before you need to get the kids. Just crank it out. Like, you already know what you want to write about. Just, start writing. And I couldn't. And I said, you know what? Yeah. I know through past experience that portal of creative knowledge opens when I walk. So I ended up walking around the block. I wrote the entire article on that walk and ended up just picking up the kids on the way. So it's like in those moments when you're feeling like, okay, I either need to be creative right now, look to past wisdom, what really works for you.
Right.
And when you're in those situations where you are feeling like, oh, I don't want this portal of creativity to close, I often use my phone, the like voice memos, and I just keep walking and talking out of the house. My husband's like, what? Who are you talking to? And I'm like, I'm just talking to myself. I just keep it going. Oh, because I walk to get them. So I just keep talking the entire way. My neighbors probably don't think I'm crazy. But it's so helpful. So instead of allowing myself to get frustrated in those moments, I focus on the solutions of how can I make this better? And if discipline works for you, if that's what's going to be your solution, then figure out what discipline means. Because it's very easy to say, oh, I just need to be more disciplined. But what does that mean, right? What does discipline mean? What does that look like for you? So really getting down to the nitty gritty of the solution will help you solve for problems moving forward.
I've tried to do, because I do the same thing. My creativity, if I'm like on the elliptical, the treadmill, I'm like, I'm going to write this, or like things will come to me. And I've started to try to do like the voice memo as well, so I don't forget stuff. And also I take myself out. Like sometimes I'll get so frustrated, but then I'll like take myself out and I'll go do 20 minutes of laundry or something else because my brain is distracted anyway. And then at least I feel like I'm being productive in some capacity, even if it's not the capacity I've like scheduled or allotted my time for. And that way that's 20 minutes of laundry I don't need to do later.
Yep.
Maybe that 20 minutes is, I can get back at work or however it was broken down.
Yep. And what you just described was how your thoughts create emotions, which then create behaviors. So when you're sitting and you're having that writer's block or the frustration with yourself, what thoughts are you having? You can start trying to identify what are the thoughts that I'm having right now. I'm not creative. Why isn't anything coming to me? I just want to say this. Why can't I think of the best word to you? Whatever it is, those thoughts bring up emotions. And it sounds like in your case, it's frustration, whatever else it may be. There's always several. And then it creates a behavior where you can't write, right? It's then creating writer's block where your fingers aren't moving on the keyboard. So your solution was to create space for yourself. You just physically said, okay, I need to just stop. I need to reset my brain. And you gave yourself space to allow those thoughts to clear. Because then when you come back without the thoughts, how are you feeling? Maybe a little more clear, maybe a little more energized, maybe a little more positive, which then may allow for writing to occur.
Sometimes it does.
Yeah.
or I lose it. And sometimes I just can't. It's just not there, you know? Yeah. So we talked a little bit about like partnerships and like the home workload. What do you think that partners, whoever we're married to, what do they misunderstand about the mental load that's often carried by moms? Because that's what I'm dealing with. I'm sitting at my computer and I get distracted or frustrated. A lot of times it's the 1,200 things, like you're saying, schedule out your time, blah, blah, blah. And that way it helps you stay organized and successful and all that stuff. So when we're finding ourselves lost in those moments, or we can't figure out a good way to get out of them or like distract ourselves, or what's what I'm looking for to reframe the moments. Like if I get up and go fold the laundry, whatever, how do I want to say this? How can we try to redistribute this load that we can't get through?
Yeah. So I heard two questions in there. The first one was more about what do the partners misunderstand? And then how can we redistribute this?
Yeah, there you go.
So from a misunderstanding standpoint, this isn't unique to your partner, right? I am not unique that I experience the invisible workload. This is a belief system that we have been living with as women that goes back generations. So it's incredibly deep. It's incredibly embedded in us, which is really hard to change for us. So oftentimes I did a corporate presentation a few months ago, and a partner raised his hand and said, I want to support my wife more, but I don't know how. Because it makes me think of when you're in a professional setting and you have a new employee or an intern, you're like, it would just be faster if I did it myself, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That doesn't allow that person to learn. That doesn't allow that other person time to evolve into a new role if you're just constantly doing everything yourself. So that is the invisible workload. I could just say, oh, go do this. And then the question I'm going to get back is, how do I do it? Or is there a way you want me to do it? Which is very considerate in a lot of ways. I know a lot of people end up getting frustrated by that sort of like, how do you not know how to do this? Again, we've had generations of modeling this behavior, of learning this behavior since we were born. So this is something that we have been bred for our entire life. And it is funny and it's so sad all at the same time.
Funny because it's true.
Exactly. So it's giving yourself grace. It's giving your partner grace because they don't fully understand the depth that this goes.
Yeah.
So the other part I would say about the misunderstanding is that it's challenging because the invisible workload is just that. It's invisible. Yeah. So again, going back to my story, and it's, it does become harder for the maternal figure when they become the maternal figure because we are raised in this environment where things just run smoothly because someone's handling it. Yeah. For example, when there's a doctor appointment that needs to get scheduled, well, first of all, someone needs to know that that doctor appointment has to get scheduled. Then someone has to book the appointment, and then someone has to take the children to the appointment. That's a lot of work that has to be done. And that's just one little, that's 3 huge steps. And that's just one part, a very small, minute detail of our everyday. So there's always a number of things that are just floating around in a maternal figure's head at any given time because there's just so much to do to run a house, to manage a family. That's whether or not you work or not professionally. So that's a huge misunderstanding, I would say, is how deep it goes and how nuanced it is and how difficult it can be to really pass along that work to someone else. So what I would say then to how to redistribute this work, because oftentimes I then get on the phone with the maternal figure and they're like, I need help, but they keep saying, what do you want help with? I don't even know where to start. Yeah. So again, I would say being proactive in your communication, right? Being honest, open communication, that is so important in any sort of relationship. So not waiting, don't wait till you get to a point where you're already boiling over, because I know the energy I'm going to come with to my husband. If I'm like at that point of boiling over, it's not going to be a productive conversation. So my first piece of advice would be to sit down regularly with yourself. Start to identify, start to check in regular to see what are your pain points? What are the things you don't want to be doing on a regular basis, or the things you procrastinate on, or the things that kind of get those emotions stirred up for you of anger, frustration, annoyance. Start to write those down, because as the seasons change, these are going to change too, right? We're in a new school year right now. That could be taking the kids to school. It could be anything. So as the seasons change, really continue to sit down with yourself and figure out what those pain points are. Another part of this is to just delegate and let it go, to then sit down and have those proactive conversations with your partner and delegate. And I talked about the dishwasher, or I'm pointing to the dishwasher as if you can see it, to ask yourself if doing the dishes at night is something that you don't want to do, then ask them to do it. But don't go behind them and redo it, because that is the biggest waste of energy that you could output, right? Like, there may be a more efficient way to load the dishwasher. There may be a better way to load the dishwasher, but who cares? If your partner is taking 30 minutes to clean up the kitchen, to clean up dinner, whatever it is, load the dishwasher, you could take those 30 minutes for yourself. Again, going back to that thought, I don't have time for me. Well, you just got 30 minutes to you. So do you want to spend that time with your head over your partner's shoulder telling them they're doing something wrong? Or would you prefer to be in a bubble bath enjoying it alone because maybe the kids are already sleeping, you want to read a book, you want to go for a run, whatever it is. That's 30 minutes you just found for yourself that you can enjoy.
I definitely go back behind my husband all the time.
We all have that tendency. But you know what? It's so true, though. And I just want to normalize that it's so normal to do that and to feel that way because, again, we've had an entire lifetime of learning, of watching our moms do this, of, you know, figuring out the best way to do this. In my house, we don't even load the dishwasher. In my parents' house, we don't even load the dishwasher because my mom just wants to do it a certain way. Like the dishwasher is a joke in my family. So our partners have not had that same level of detail. They've not had that same level of experience. So maybe that first step with delegation is also teaching. If that makes you feel better, if that makes your partner feel better, that they have a good way of doing it, educate them. It's not that they're dumb because they don't know how to load a dishwasher. They don't have the amount of hours we have of this experience, right? So allow them the space and allow them, be collaborative to help teach them, to support their growth. Because I can tell you right now, if you go behind your partner constantly and keep telling them they're doing things wrong, they're not going to help. They're not going to do those things. So it's up to you to find, when you sit down with them, ask them, how do you want this process to go? Do you want me to show you? And if they're like, no, I can load a dishwasher, then move on. If they're like, yeah, I would love to know how to do this, then teach them. But it's all about that communication piece.
I grew up in a house. I had like stepsisters, and so there was like 6 of us. And so my parents would joke, because in one household we didn't have a dishwasher to load. My parents would say that we had 6 of them. So I can ninja a dishwasher better than anybody because I don't want to wash any more dishes. It's a life skill I had to learn.
Yep.
And in tandem with like mental load, moms especially carry so much guilt for a multitude of reasons. How can we reframe this guilt into something that's like a little bit more productive instead of wallowing in all the things we're not doing good enough? Like you were saying, trying to get 500% of yourself. You're one human being. You know, something's got to give. So how do we in our brains, how can we start to reframe this and so that we're not feeling like crap all the time?
Yeah, so I just did a Ditch the Mom Guilt workshop the other week with a local moms club. Ooh. So it's very top of mind for me right now. You know, going back to what we were talking about earlier, mom guilt often stems from us trying to live up to that ideal, perfect parent, right? So think of the term super mom. I hate this term. I cannot express to you how much I hate this term because I think it is so destructive. It glorifies the invisible workload as a superpower, right? It's the mom that can do it all. Moms shouldn't be doing it all. If we want to move away from a place of having support, distributing this, then putting other people on a pedestal of being able to do it all, we're creating that ideal and supporting that idea and giving it power. I hate it. It drives me crazy. So if you're feeling mom guilt about something, I just want to clarify too, feeling guilt is okay, right? It's a normal emotion. It's going to come up. We have a wide spectrum of emotions for a reason. So it's okay. And it often shows that we are looking at our past situations and trying to make ourselves better. So I want to honor that piece of it. But it's when it outweighs everything else and we start seeing it show up in all aspects of our lives, that's a signal that there's a more serious problem going on. So what I would say to readdress this and reframe this perspective is you have to start by noticing the thoughts that you're having, the emotions you're feeling, and then how you react because of it. So you really just start by noticing, I'm having that mom guilt. Let me just stop. What are the thoughts? What are the emotions? And how am I reacting to all of this? once you are aware that you aren't grounded in yourself, because when you're in that state of focusing and spiraling and all that stuff is happening in your brain, again, that echo chamber of it being very loud and very scary, you're believing a false narrative somewhere that's causing you pain. So I want you to write it all down. That's step 2. This writing it down, like when I was saying that being in your brain, it's that echo chamber. It's much louder. It's much scarier. Right. Writing it all down actually gives you space from the thoughts, from those emotions, from those behaviors. It gives you space to see a little different perspective. I can't tell you how many times I get on the phone with a client and they say, oh my God, now that I just said this out loud, it sounds so silly. It's true, not always, but sometimes just giving yourself that space just allows you to see a slightly different perspective. So write it down. The situation you were in when you were feeling guilty. So just write down a little bit of the details. Maybe I was in the kitchen, I was cooking dinner, whatever it is. Write down the thoughts you were having in the situation. And then the feelings you were experiencing. We know you were feeling guilty, but what could be sitting right next to guilt? Oftentimes that emotion is going to be coupled with something else. So try to identify what it could be. And then finally, how you are reacting in the situation to yourself, to others. I mean, you could be belittling yourself. You could be taking it out on your partner. You could be taking it out on your kids, whatever that is. Once you have all of this done, start to ask yourself, what do you want your story to be moving forward, right? Because when we disempower our belief system, when we start to break it down, it gives you space to figure out, what do you want to believe moving forward? It's all just exploration. The more you do this, I promise the easier and more natural it will become, but you have to start somewhere. And this is really the first step in major transformation. I just had a client the other day say to me, it was a typical pattern that she's been in with her partner. And in the moment, she realized, I see it happening. She could see it. It didn't change yet, but she could see, I was starting to feel this way, and I noticed I was having these thoughts. Then I could see the feeling. I could sense the behavior of what happened, and I couldn't stop it necessarily, but I saw it happening. And I was like, that's progress. That is you moving on to the next step. So writing it all down, starting to get that awareness is huge.
Wow, that's pretty good. I like that though, the dissolve to empower, like you have to break down to see what's at the foundation in order to rebuild, and rebuild more productively.
So
Yeah. That's pretty cool. How can we change like this idea of like, like we're always on survival mode. So if we are relinquishing our mom guilt and we are dissolving to re-empower, how does this help us change, or what can we do to change from surviving every day and getting through the tough times to a thriving and flourishing state of existence, I guess?
100%. They are two different mindsets. If you are in survival mode, there is something happening in your mind. There is juggling that's occurring. You're out of balance. There are going to be negative terms that are associated with that surviving mentality, right? I'm just trying to make it to the end of the day. So what we just walked through, identifying your thoughts that you're having and dissolving those, is going to lead to a point in which you are thriving, because then you're feeling more empowered. You're feeling like you have balance. You're feeling like you're not juggling anymore, because maybe you're not thinking, I'm a shitty mom anymore. Maybe you're starting to think, you know what? This is pretty hard. Motherhood's really hard, and that's okay. And I'm doing the best I can. And now I have some support from my husband or, whoever your partner is. I have maybe support from an not all of us have partners, maybe I have support from an external source now, a third party that's able to help me. I've invested maybe somehow in that extra care. I'm starting to acknowledge my needs. Survival mode, you're not even a factor in the equation, right? You are just trying to keep the train on the tracks. You don't have any skin in that game. Thriving, you're showing up. You're prioritizing yourself. We all have the same amount of hours in the day. So it's how you want to use them. So again, dissolving those negative thoughts, rebuilding into something that's more empowering. And again, this takes time. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. So it's knowing it's going to take time. It's asking for support. It's communicating, and it's delegating. Gotta delegate.
Right? Delegation is key. That is so true. And that's not something I've gotten a lot better about. Like I told my husband, I was like, if he's not cleaning the house, I'm not cleaning the house. If we're not doing this together, then someone else can do it. Cause this isn't like, I'm not taking that on.
So I will give you a perfect example to that as well. Last night, I had a little work that I wanted to do. I will work in the evening sometimes. It's not because my boundaries are being overstepped. I only truly will do it when I feel jazzed up about something. And I'm like, this is me time. Like I want to spend this time working on something that's creative or, invest in myself that way. So I took the time to work on something and all of the dishes were still on the dining room table because I work at the dining room table. So they're all behind me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do them tomorrow. And I was okay with that because normally my husband will do bath time and then I do the cleanup of the kitchen during that time. That's how we divide. So then by the time the kids are asleep, everything's done and we can just go on to the hours of our evening. So I did not choose to do the dishes last night because I wanted to spend that time for something I was excited about. I ended up going to bed and my husband did not follow me. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm doing the dishes. And my first instinct was to say, oh, don't do it. I'll do it tomorrow. I didn't say it. I stopped myself because in the moment I realized, oh, here's my conditioning of, I'm sorry, let me go do it. Let me be the one to do it. The dishes are my job. I'm sorry. No, I didn't need to take on that burden. I didn't need to take on that responsibility in that moment. He was doing it. I allowed him to do it. I went to bed. All was right with the world. It was okay. So again, it's noticing and just allowing things to happen and be okay with it.
Yeah, I like that. Sometimes my husband does that too, but I'm better at washing dishes too. Sometimes I worked in restaurants for too long. Like I can see things people don't see.
And it's true. So my situation may work really well for you then. I'm doing the dishes. So how can you then divide and conquer? What can he be doing? Like you said, if you're not cleaning, I'm not cleaning. So in that moment, my husband's doing bath with the kids. It's how can you divide up? So then it's not you doing the dishes, but also doing the laundry and also doing all the social coordination and also all the doctor appointments and all the school stuff and everything else. It's, I can do this, but what is your responsibility?
We are fortunate enough that I can take mom breaks. And usually it's because I'm about ready to blow my gasket because my husband travels a lot for work. This is my little anecdote. And I've said to him a couple of times, I was like, I just want you to see what I juggle. And he's like, that's so rude. And I said, yeah, but you don't know. Like the dog food magically appears, the cat food magically is stocked. Like the animals get to the vet, so like you can take a couple of days and feel my pain. And he's like, what? And the first time I went away and came back, he was just like, oh, I'd have a better understanding now. And especially when he travels a lot now, he's like, okay, mommy needs a break. She's been doing it too much.
And that awareness only happened because you allowed it to.
Yeah.
Right? Well, you could have never taken that break for yourself. You could have never prioritized your needs. You could have kept being at home and you could have let resentment build. You could have gotten to the point where you exploded. Like you said, you were heading in that direction anyway, but you didn't. You chose to prioritize your needs, and that's okay.
And that was a lot lesson learned. I remember finding out I was pregnant and I wasn't expecting to be pregnant. It wasn't part of our plan. And I was, angry and resentful towards him because he didn't have to do what I had to do from the get-go. I remember thinking that I wasn't going to behave in certain ways because I didn't want to, create a cycle, a pattern of behavior. But I also was going to say what I needed because I'm not that kind of person. And we won't go down a rabbit hole, but just because I grew up as a people pleaser and not having the validation that I needed. So I had to seek it in other ways and blah, 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 blah. So I remember saying when I became a mom, I wasn't going to just stand back and take it, and do it all. And sometimes I have to be very defiant with what I need, but it's almost like in choosing myself and choosing that my needs matter too, I can empower my husband to do the same. And he has his own struggles as my partner and with, becoming a father later in life and what that means and balance and being the breadwinner. There's so many factors that go into it, right? But I think you said something earlier in the conversation about choosing, time for yourself and choosing certain things. It's all a balance, but you do have to choose yourself, yes. And I said it before and I'll say it again, if mom's okay, no one's okay. However your household dynamic is, whoever is the primary caregiver, if that human is not okay, the household can't be okay because something is amiss. And yep. I think our generation in particular has been really fortunate and kind of trailblazing in the fact that we are not going to play second fiddle to certain things. And we're not going to allow certain things that have happened in the past to maintain or be maintained as the status quo. They're unhealthy. They're not attainable. Being a super mom who does everything, and that's not to be said for the women who love it and enjoy it and thrive with it. My hat's off to you. Amen, sister. I am clapping for you the whole way to the finish line. But for those of us who, like myself, who I struggle with being the end all be all in all capacities, who says we have to be? So that's what you're coming from, this place of wear the cross you want to wear, carry the burden you want to carry, and allow other people to help you. I think that's a beautiful, and be okay if it's not your way. That's something I struggle with. Put the dishes away properly. So I just think that what you're saying is a really beautiful message to women of no matter what you want from your role or how your role looks, there's a way for you to frame it in your brain and feel successful, feel like you're thriving, and not feel like it, actually be those things without, losing who you are as an individual.
Yeah. And just to add one more point to that, like you said, this is a new generation. We are starting to talk more about this. And one of the reasons why I really promote this message and really want to support maternal figures in making these changes for themselves is because I want my daughter to grow up in a space and time where it's not just assumed that she does all these things and she has the choice and she knows, because in our household, she sees her father do the laundry all the time. She sees her father do all of these things that were not modeled in my household. So I feel it is my responsibility because I want her to grow up in a better place than it's leave it better than the way you found it. I want it to be better than the way I found it. And I want her to have a much easier path, and I want her to feel comfortable advocating for herself and not always needing to advocate for herself, because if it's more equal and it's more understood, then there will be less need for that. But I want her to grow up in a much more fair and much more understanding environment. So, and that starts with us. We have to make the change.
Yeah, absolutely. And 100%. And, when my mom, all she ever wanted to do was be a stay-at-home mom, and that was an issue in and of itself. So it was okay for her to be the end all be all because that's what she wanted. Yep. And that's a fine path too. That's not right for me. But I don't necessarily think that it's when you're trying to manage professional and personal, like if you don't divide and conquer, like it's really hard to be successful, I think, personally for me.
Well, and even if you're a stay-at-home mom, you still struggle with taking that time for yourself. I think being a stay-at-home mom is probably harder in that you never get to leave the office, right? It's 24/7. And that pressure,
so true.
It's a lot. Where is the line? It's hard enough to say I'm going to take a PTO day to be sick, let alone when you're in the space and everyone else around you is sick. You don't get to take that day off. You don't have the choice because you are that caregiver. So I think for stay-at-home moms, even, just as much, to prioritize yourself and carve out that space for you. That does not, if you want it to be your full identity and that serves you, that's great, but you're still an individual. Whether you're working, whether you're professional, it doesn't matter who you are and where you work and what you do. You have different identities that make you up. And you have every right, the same right as everyone else in that house. What you're trying to do for your kids and for your partner, for them to have a personally fulfilling life, you have that same right. So that's what we do. We focus on that.
Shanna, this has been great. Where can people find you who might want to inquire more about your coaching services and the programs that you offer?
Yeah, so my website is a great place to start. It's maternalgrove.com. You can find me there, but Instagram is another great place. I'm always posting free content and all different kinds of information there, and my DMs are open. So always reach out. I love to chat with any sort of new follower who join the community. So yeah, I'm around.
Is there anything else we didn't know we needed to know about maternal coaching or mom life or anything that you offer?
It's hard. Mom life is hard, and that's okay. But there are resources out there who can help you make it easier. But the only person who can choose that is you. I have people that buy gift cards. The people that get the gift cards don't use them normally.
Oh, wow.
You have to be the one that makes the change for yourself. So choose, if something's not working for you, to make a change and find support that works. Sometimes it's like dating. You have to test out things to see what you like and what you don't like.
So
Therapy may be the route, coaching may be the route, but third-party perspective is so helpful. I've been in and out of coaching, in and out of therapy for a very long time. And having that third-party perspective is so helpful to hear you. So highly suggest it, but it's hard. You don't have to do it alone.
No, you don't. I think that's really valuable insight. I'm going to leave us with one thing. And this is actually something you said when we were chatting earlier, that really resonated with me. So I hope it resonates with the audience. And it just kind of ties everything to a neat bow. And again, this is what Shanna said. If you don't invest in yourself, who will? And I think that's a beautiful statement that you said that has kind of like stuck with me for the last couple of weeks. So now you know where to find Shanna. Thank you so much for your wonderful insight. I really appreciated having you on here to chat with us. I'm the mom who knows nada. My name is Brianna. Until next time, have fun learning all the things you didn't know you needed to know.